We are live. What is up, everyone? It's Alan's Movie Talk. Back at it again. I'm here today to talk about Dexter. I'm here with my wife, Caitlin, if you
Hi.
want to say hi.
I
Hello.
am Caitlin. I'm the wife.
Yes. Everyone bear with us. This is our first stream, so we're kind of just, making it up as we go along. But I know you guys are probably wondering, my name's Alan's Movie Talk. I usually don't talk about TV shows. But today, we're here to talk about Dexter because that has been both of our obsession over the last couple months. That is pretty much the only TV show that we have talked about or watched. So we're just going to kind of get right into it and start discussing the show. We're going to start with overall thoughts on the show. For me, this is definitely one of my favorite shows of all time. I had heard about how great it was, for years from friends, pretty much everyone on the internet. And, after starting it, I feel like that's all true. And, is how I feel about the show and why it's so popular and so many people like it. I've seen tons of influences now that I've seen the show in other shows. I think I told you before, watching the show Barry, that there was, I felt a million influences from Dexter while watching that show too. Just a very influential show and a great one. So
yeah, I'd seen it for years on like Netflix, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I would always like scroll different shows, and I'm like, I don't know if I want to watch that, whatever.
Yeah.
Like that's an older show. Who wants to watch that? But like, I'm so
Yeah.
glad that I gave it the chance because it is so good.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't expect to like it to the level that I did. I was like
Yep.
so invested in this.
Yeah.
Like the show is like a whole series, So I'm just like excited for like the prequels and the sequels and the spin-offs. So
and where it's going,
Mhm.
Yeah, and to me, it's one of those shows. Like, there's a lot of shows out there. Breaking Bad's kind of the example that everyone says, like, oh, it takes a whole season for you to really get going and get into it. And for me, like, that was just not the case. Dexter was a show I just loved. Like, from the first episode, I was like, okay,
it wasn't
I'm
like
bought
a slow
in.
burn. Like you got right into it, which is the one thing I liked. Like it held you in.
Yeah, exactly.
If you didn't like the first episode, you probably weren't going to like the show as a whole, but like it honestly, it just gets better. Like it ages like a fine wine.
Yeah.
Okay, it only gets better from here.
Yeah.
Like
and obviously, yeah, exactly. I mean, obviously, I think as we're going to talk about today, I think there are seasons that are better than others, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I tend to think that the first 4 seasons are the best of the show.
Yes.
I think that's where the show's writing, really everything about it, the story, the writing, the characters, everything was at its best in those 4 seasons. But I heard before we started watching the show that, like, hey, this show kind of falls off a cliff after season 4 and gets really bad in that back half of the series. And my least favorite seasons are in the back half of the show. But I feel that those last 4 seasons aren't nearly as bad as everyone tries to make them out to be, except for season 8. Spoiler of how I feel about that one. But
I agree.
Yeah, a lot of them, like, even I would say 6 and 8 are probably the worst. But like, I got a lot.
8 was painful.
What was that? Yeah, 8 was bad. We'll just spoil that right off the top. I mean,
we're not going to give too many spoilers going.
Yeah. Well, this is going to be a completely spoiler-filled discussion, but right off rip of
we don't want to
just
jump to the conclusions.
Yeah, but how we feel, season 6 and 8, absolutely, and 8 especially is like the worst of the worst.
Yeah.
Overall, I mean, like, this is all we've been watching TV wise. I think we started it after Thanksgiving, and I'm so happy that we did. And I'm kind of punching myself like, hey, we probably should have got on this a lot earlier than we did.
Yeah.
We're gonna go through today.
Question in the chat.
Yeah, we got Mediz. That's funny.
Christina actually has a question. Yeah. What's her question?
How drunk are you, Mediz? Yeah, let's put that back up. So type Christina's question in there. We'll kind of get into it. So we're gonna go season by season today, and talk about each season and kind of get into the nitty gritty. And how we feel. I sent you notes, obviously, on plot details and everything for the show because
it's a lot to take in. So it's a lot.
We've been watching. Yeah, it's been like almost 4 months now.
We've binge watched like the entire Dexter series. We've been through
it was a lot, right? Like we took in a lot of emotional damage. So it's like I don't really remember all the details from those early seasons as much as I did. Medi's posted a comment here. Do you feel like Deborah dying off was a bit? Okay, we'll start there. And then we'll kind of get into the seasons. I feel like it was a little bit of a detriment to the show. Me personally, because I felt like the Deborah and Dex relationship got the most interesting by the end when she found out and was basically helping him, throughout. We'll kind of get into it. I felt like there was a couple characters early on in the show that left too quickly that could have kind of filled that role.
Yeah.
But with Deborah, I didn't want to shoot ahead. I really wanted to stick with seasons 1 through 8.
It's okay.
But we'll kind of tap into New Blood a little bit because we watched that. I loved where they went with Deborah in New Blood, where she kind of was the stand-in for Harry. And obviously you wouldn't get that if it wasn't for her dying. And I felt like Jennifer Carpenter's performance as Deb was the best in New Blood as the Vision. I feel like she really had a lot of fun with it. I know me and you talked about that.
Yeah.
So for me, it was kind of a little bit of both, right? I felt like they could have went a little longer with her knowing, but I also felt like we got a lot of good stuff from her in New Blood.
For me, I feel like it was a benefit because I really don't see how Dexter, even if like the show, his storyline, it's going to continue on, right? Like there was no way going forward with Deb. There just really wasn't. And it was just like one of these characters that they'd built up for you to love. Like Deb is the sister that loves him so much. She will literally do anything for Dexter. And there wasn't going to be a point where Dexter could go, live somewhere with who. We'll get into that later. With, Deb just being left behind. Like that just wasn't going to work. And I thought for me, it was so poetic the way that she did die and the way that it was handled. Like, I think that was handled very well, like with the send off to Deb. Yeah. And it felt right for Dexter and Deb's relationship.
So I felt like the send off for Deb was good in theory. The execution of it wasn't the best. I mean, I think that's just with season 8 as a whole. I feel like execution and it was just a mess all over the place. I didn't like Deb dying off screen.
No,
that was just like, I didn't feel right about that. So maybe that kind of plays into how I feel about how it was a little bit of a detriment because I'm like, I would have probably preferred a more emotional filled death than what we got. So that kind of bums me out a little bit. I don't know. But like I said, I enjoyed where it went in New Blood with her kind of being like the Harry stand-in. And I know it's been reported too that she's not going to be in Resurrection. We're kind of going back to Harry. As the the dark passenger pretty much in there. So we're not really going to see much of her, but
we did have another question in the comments too.
Yeah, I see that too. I'm going to say that is very. I wouldn't say that's pointless. Okay, so she said Rita dying was pointless. I'm not going to say that was necessarily pointless. I don't know if it should have happened so quickly in the show. I think me and you talked about it before that I really didn't like the fact that she died without finding out who he was.
Yeah.
I mean, he might have, because after that scarring vision that we got from freaking Harrison and New Blood, maybe he did reveal that it was Dexter, right? And and everything.
He told her the whole tea, and then
and ever since watching New Blood, I've kind of thought in my head like, oh wow, I never even thought about what actually happened there. And I'm like, wait, like he could have probably told her and like kind of tortured her that way, and like made it that much worse for her. So I mean, I know how you felt because
I had an emotional breakdown. I cried like a baby. I was like, I need to take a day or two off. Like, I was mourning Rita like she was just like a family member. It was crazy. I think it just really like as a mom myself, seeing like the baby crying, and I'm just like, oh my god, what if that was me? Like, what would happen if that was my babies? And then it just like set me off. I was like, I can't do this. And it's like I loved Rita because she was so sweet, and it was just like she was genuinely such a good soul. That she saw the good in everybody and even in Dexter. And,
agreed.
I did feel like her death was kind of, in a way, like I get where she's coming from. Like Christina said, like it's pointless because as soon as Rita dies, they realize, oh, wait, we have Harrison. We got to give Harrison a mother. So we just give him Jamie. It's just like they could have kept Rita a little bit longer.
Okay. All right.
They just,
I wanted this to be a little bit more structured than this has been so far, but we're kind of jumping all over the place. No, you're good.
Sorry.
But I mean, like, it's true, right? Like, and we didn't get to Jamie right away. I don't think that happened until season 6 or 7. I can't remember.
No.
Yeah, it was a whole blur, right?
We forgot about Harrison for a little bit.
I think it was season 6, though, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the show forgot about Harrison. Really meant to, the show forgot about Harrison. I mean, he was basically just like, hey, Jamie, oh, you don't have a life? Okay, you're just going to watch this kid all goddamn day. That's how we're going to go. So, yeah. And then I'm going to post this. Medice, I agree. Rita wasn't meant for Dexter. I agree. I think it was because Rita, like you said, Rita was just a sweetheart.
She was too good of a soul.
Everything that ended up happening to her, Harrison, Cody asked her, it was all his fault, And
it's like later,
as much as I love the character of Dexter,
it's like later. I'll get into my opinion later when we get into like that, like who I really feel like was Dexter's soulmate, but it wasn't Rita.
Yeah. I mean, we've had this conversation. I think we are in agreement on that. Who that is.
Yes.
And anyone who's watched the 8 seasons of the show probably knows where we're leading with that.
I mean, maybe people have varying opinions, but me and you have the same one.
Maybe. Yeah, we have the same one for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, Medice, appreciate you commenting, but we're gonna streamline this and start talking about the specific seasons. So we're gonna start off obviously with the introductory season one. Like we said, starting off, this season for me hooked me right away. It starts off with the monologue. Tonight's the night. Everything. You get Dexter, who works in Miami Metro. He's a blood spatter analyst, serial killer by night. But obviously, the twist with him is that he is more of an anti-hero than he is really a straight up villain, because his victims are all people who, are horrible people who've gotten off with crimes and murder. Obviously he has the code that he was taught by Harry. And you get that in little nuggets throughout the episodes. Obviously we'll talk later on how I think the code becomes pretty morally flexible the later in the show that we get. But I felt like in the beginning, like I said, with the writing early on in those first 4 seasons, I really felt like it was very strong across the board. You didn't have a lot of plot inconveniences, inconsistencies with the rules of Dexter and his moral, ground. So I really like that, so the introduction, obviously we get all the characters, Dexter is intriguing right off rip. He sets up how, Rita is essentially his cover. I mean, and that kind of already started, the people who are in the camp of Rita shouldn't have been with Dexter, it was right off rip. He told you like, hey, I might have some feeling for this woman, but I'm only doing this to cover for my real life and what I really love to do.
Dexter made it very clear. I don't feel love. Like I don't love anybody. I can have I could care, if I were to care and I were to love somebody, maybe, it would be this person, that best person, but like he never genuinely loved anybody at this point.
Yeah. And, he sets up and says right at the beginning of the show, like, I don't have feelings for anyone. And I think that evolves, over the show.
It does.
I think he eventually does start to care. And I think he did care for Rita at one point. I
think he grows to care for her more.
I think he grew to love her over time.
It was more of a convenience, but then it genuinely turns into something.
Yeah, exactly. So right off rip, that's what it is. And then obviously later on in the season, I don't want to get too off topic and jump back and forth, but you have the whole conflict that season with Rita's husband. I don't even remember his name. Or not Rita's husband, but
Paul.
Paul. The father. Yeah, the father of Aster and Cody. You obviously have all the drama from that, where he's getting out of jail. And I love that scene. I see the TikTok clips every once in a while of the scene where like he's in the doorway and he's talking to Dexter. He's like, "Oh, you fucking my wife?" And he's just like, "I'm just the babysitter, man." And I'm like, Dexter's like quirky little humor, that they have throughout the show. Is just great for me. And then he, goes to swing at him, and Dexter like doesn't even flinch, because he's a psycho.
Just like whatever.
So, yeah. So, that whole dynamic, that was pretty much the Rita side of it for the whole season was, him trying to not let her know about his life and everything. And then obviously you have the introduction of Deb. And I think we're in agreement on Deb's characterization early on in the show. Very needy, very bratty,
very
very
whiny,
and just very dependent on Dexter, and just in a way that's like annoying, you know.
It reminds me of like a teenage girl, just like whiny, and I'm just like, she's kind of insufferable for me at the beginning. I mean, she does progress later on, so don't like. If you've never seen Dexter, don't get deterred here. Like, she does grow as a character, but
she absolutely does. Yeah,
she's very whiny, and you're just like, oh god,
and very needy, and it's just like so codependent on Dexter. And for him, I feel like with him trying to live his double life, that's just nothing but inconvenience for as much as he, does care for her and everything. And then, so, then we get there. Yeah. And then, we get into the other Miami Metro characters. Season 1 didn't really dive too deep into them as characters. I mean, you got Batista, you got Masuka, you got LaGuardia, you got Dokes. Which, spoiler, Dokes is one of my favorite characters from earlier in the show. I know you weren't as high on him as I was. I love Dokes. But really, those characters in the beginning didn't have a lot to do.
No.
I know I've seen people talk about it where, like, they had this weird angle in the first couple of episodes of season 1 where, like, LaGuardia, like, totally wanted Dexter.
She did.
And it was weird. Yeah, and it was like, dude, she was like sexually harassing him and everything at work.
I was like, HR is about to get a call from LaGuardia.
Yeah, and then you even get that scene where him and Deb are in the conference room after, and she's like, "Hey, Dexter, you wanna come to my office real quick?" And then Deb just looks at him like, "You're boning her, aren't you?" And he's like, "No, I'm not."
Yeah.
So that was really cool. But then it was like, why was that? What was that? And then they just never brought it up.
They were just like, "Yeah, this isn't working."
Yeah, I guess. They just I didn't really understand that. I feel like maybe that was a pilot thing that they kind of threw out there, and then just were like, hey, we're never gonna pick that up again. So yeah, to me, like I said, I loved Batista. I thought Masuka was great, comedic relief from the beginning. But those three, I don't feel like they really dived into them as characters. They were kind of just there in the first season. And then obviously the first season was, the Ice Truck Killer, that was the first thing right off rip. Sorry, I was looking at my notes.
That was like the biggest thing I feel like we started with was the Ice Truck Killer.
Yeah, and you get the opening scene where he goes to the crime scene where Deb is working with the prostitutes in Miami Vice and stuff, and you get all the dismembered bodies with no blood in the pool, and Dexter has this fascination, with the Ice Truck Killer. And he essentially admires him and wants to learn from him, because he's like, oh, well, I didn't think about this. How do you get the blood out of all the bodies? So that was really cool to see the way he kind of looked up to him.
Yes, it was like his hero. He was like, wow,
and spoiler,
poetic.
It's Brian, right? It's his brother, so it's kind of fitting. That early on, even before he knew that he was looking up to him like an older brother in that sense. Which looking back after watching it, that's a part where I'm like, oh, that was a cool little detail in there, that it was like, okay, yeah, he's looking at his older brother, but he doesn't know it, but he's still looking at him in that admiration. So that was really cool.
Yeah.
And then like I talked about before, we start to learn about his past through flashbacks. That Harry knew early on in his life about who he was, after finding him, in the pool of blood, and that's revealed throughout the season. And it was in little nuggets here and there. It wasn't just
we were getting little nuggets. It was like between the Ice Truck Killer breaking into his house, leaving little doll parts, and having this weird little back and forth relationship with each other. Like, he liked it, and I was like, I don't know if somebody that was murdering people was breaking into my house and everything. Cool, I don't know how I'd feel, but he's just like, oh, please come back to me. I need you to respond, please, baby. And I mean, he doesn't actually say that, but still, it's just like, he romanticized the fact of that. And then he was challenged with the finding out of the death and the inheritance of his biological father. Yeah. Which Deb was totally against. And she's like, please don't do this. Don't look into us. You have Harry. He was your dad. And, Dexter wasn't emotionally attached.
I want to say that was actually...
It was season 1.
Was it season 1?
Yep, because remember they go on a trip. Rita, Rudy, Deb
go that's right,
to the house. This is where we have the Rudy or Deb's boyfriend.
I forgot whose house was that?
it was his biological dad's house. They were clearing out his stuff to sell the house.
You're right.
Remember?
Yes, you're right. You're right. Okay.
And so, that's where Rudy
Yeah.
meets Dexter, and he was like, "Hey,
Yeah.
I'm your sister's boyfriend. Nice to meet you."
Yep.
And, they had like a really good time. Rita's there, and it was kind of like a double date sleepover for adults, I guess.
Yeah, and then too, it was like what I thought was cool with that sequence in particular, because it was like we knew at that point that he knew who Dexter was, but he was the only one. No one, Dexter didn't even know that was the ice truck killer.
We didn't even know that was really like the ice truck killer at that point. We're just
we started to figure it out. Yeah. And you're very good at predicting things, with TV shows and movies. Yeah, like you ruin movies and TV show half the time. So it was kind of cool to see that where he knew, but Dexter. So it was like he was outsmarting Dexter at that point. Yeah, and I thought that was really cool. And then obviously you brought it up, where Rudy, as the ice truck killer, before anyone finds out, seeks Deb out. They end up having a relationship. So that's a very dicey situation, where Dexter's sister is dating the person that is playing these mind games with Dexter and is pretty much trying to go after him. So that caused for some very pretty much for him to keep a close eye on Dexter the entire season and to know
it was like he got close to his sister, which is Dexter's like stepsister. They're not just to clarify, none of these people are actually related besides Dexter and like Rudy. So
and Brian,
not like and Brian, well, Rudy Brian.
Brian. Yeah.
It's the same person, but you don't want people to think like, ooh, Deb's like getting with her brother who's Rudy. Like, no.
Yeah. No.
So like you don't know. So Rudy / Brian is a doctor. He's a doctor that makes prosthetics. And that's how she meets him, as a doctor in the hospital from one of their victims. And, that's where they start.
From one of the ice truck killers. So he ends up giving a prosthetic to one of the people that he hacked up. Yeah, which, makes you wonder. Yeah, makes you wonder. Very business, I guess. Yeah, very sadistic, and makes you wonder how long he was doing that, before, when he was killing people, like, with that being his profession. Was he hacking up his victims and then fixing them after the fact? And some weird.
I guess that's a good way to stay in business. If you want to make sure you're getting money, but I don't even think he's actually a doctor. I think he just somehow made up the credentials to do so. I don't think he was actually a doctor.
No. Do I think he went to
No, he did not go to medical school.
No, probably not. Yeah, probably not. That probably didn't happen.
But then, but get back on track here a little bit. It's so they meet and everything, and then their relationship, he just gets close to Deb. Not that because he cares about Deb. He gives a flying crap about Deb. No, he just wants to get close to Dexter and watch Dexter and be near Dexter, because he knows hey, this is, my brother here.
Yeah.
And what kills me, and I have said this to you 1,000 times, is the whole, I was engaged to the ice truck killer. You were engaged for 2 seconds.
Well, they got engaged, and then
will you marry me? Surprise!
I'm the ice truck killer, and I'm then he
kidnapped count that.
And that was it. Yeah,
that was it. It was a 2-second engagement, and she goes on forever, for eternity. It's always you were engaged to the ice truck killer. I just would have kept that stuff to myself. I wouldn't even told anyone about that.
Well, at that point, everybody knew, right? Because when we get into later this season, and he attacks Batista. And Dexter ends up figuring it out because of the busted lip and everything. He's like, he was like, oh, I think he said he had an accident at work. Yeah. And the lip was there, and Dexter's like, oh, that didn't happen this morning. That happened a couple days ago. It's already healing. And then, when Batista mentions, hey, I gave the guy a fat, busted lip, and that's kind of when they put 2 and 2 together. They're like, oh, hey, this is him, right? So season 1, overall, we've already been talking about this for a bit. Season 1 was good. It was really good. It introduced you to
the character of Dexter.
Yeah, it just established this world, that we were going to be in for 8 seasons, and it did such a good job at establishing it. And then obviously, we get the truth towards the end of the season, in the finale, really, when Brian lures Dexter to their old house, and then it's revealed that him and Brian's mom were killed, and Harry locked up Brian in a I think it was a psych ward or something. you know, and took Dexter because he felt like Brian was too damaged. So it's kind of, in a sense, like a revenge story also, because it's like Brian
Yeah.
wants Dexter to join him and just have them both kill whoever they want, right? And
Yeah.
Dexter's not about that. And obviously Brian sets up the table just like Dexter does with all of his kills. And he says, hey, kill Deb, sever your whole old life and join me and go. And, you know, I thought that was very emotional, basically, when Dexter said no. Like, I'm not going to kill Deb. And he ends up turning the tide and killing his own biological brother, his own actual blood, for his adopted sister and his adopted family. You know, like I said early on, he says he doesn't care. He says it doesn't matter to him. And then he proves at the end that no, she does matter to me. My life that I've built as a cover matters to me.
Yeah.
And so that to me started the whole series journey that Dexter goes on going forward. And then obviously too at the end, Dokes is like really on his trail and he starts to realize like, hey, there's a lot here that you're just not telling me, you know, and you're leaving us out on a lot of this stuff. So that's when Dokes gets really, really suspicious of Dexter going into season 2.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, at this point, I don't think we're missing anything for season 1, really. That
no,
we
I think
covered.
we pretty much covered that.
We're good there. So, yeah, so then we move, you know, into season 2, which, you know, I loved season 1. I felt like it was one of the greatest seasons that we've ever gotten of television. We move right into season 2. And the big thing, it's revealed right in the first episode of season 2. You know, I don't know who it was that figured it out. I think it was like some divers in the ocean or
there
something.
There was some divers.
Find all of Dexter's body bags that are in, you know, the bay in Miami. And, you know, they figure it out that there's a new serial killer out here. Not necessarily new, but a big serial killer that's even has more kills than the Ice Truck Killer is. And then obviously that's when he is anointed the name of the Bay Harbor Butcher.
Yeah.
And, you know, it sets up that whole storyline where the FBI comes in, Agent Frank Lundy comes in, which we'll get into in a minute. His character, in some senses, I really liked him. Others, I didn't. But when it comes, you know, I just want to start and say with this season, when it comes with that whole storyline with the Bay Harbor Butcher and where that goes, I've talked to you about this before.
Yeah.
I really felt like that storyline was done way, way too early in this show. I really felt like that was a storyline that should have been saved for the final season, where
it should have been.
Even though they don't know it's Dexter, they know who the Bay Harbor Butcher is. They're onto him. They know who he is.
Yeah.
And I feel like we just kind of did that very early in the show, even for how much I love that season.
Yeah.
And what they did in that season, I feel like it was just done a bit too early.
It was. I was really surprised how early they did that. And I was like, oh, we're going to go like seasons. No one's going to know. And then it was like, nope, second season.
Boom.
And I'm just like, oh, this
first
is
episode too.
Lay out. First episode. I'm like, I feel like this is something you'd lay out like in like later seasons. Like we'd have a build up to this and like more stuff. But no, I mean, they did it good. I just would have, like you said, preferred it been like a later season.
Yeah, it was done. You know, like I said, the early seasons, the writing was done great, and I didn't feel any differently with season 2. You know, and then we get the beginning of the season. Dexter's kind of struggling. This is kind of where they start the struggles that Dexter goes through, like when he has a big moment in his life, like killing his brother, and he starts to kind of have issues killing and, you know, get cold feet. And then obviously you got Dokes following him. And I think season 2, you know, we talked about in season 1 where the Miami Metro characters didn't have a lot to do. Season 2 is kind of where we get more meat on the bones with Batista, with Masuka, with LaGuerta, and then with Dokes as well. That's really the season where he is like the main protagonist for Dexter. And, you know, is all on him. And yeah, like I said, their dynamic between Dexter and Dokes is just something about those early seasons that I just missed so much. And like I said, I felt like with both Brian and with Dokes, they ended those character storylines way too early.
I think so.
I felt like there was so much potential and so much more that
there was, and especially like knowing in context, like what kind of protagonists and things like that we get in later seasons. It's like
Yeah, it's like, I was thinking,
They
during
shot
like season
themselves in the
6.
foot with some some choices that they made for sure.
I agree. Yeah, like when you get into like season 6 past, you're just like, shit, man.
Yeah.
It'd be really great for Dokes to be here right now. That would be such
I'd
a
give
good
anything
dynamic.
for just like
Yeah.
I'd
Or
take
even Brian. Yeah,
Yeah.
even Brian, because it's like, we get the later on in the show where we get the flashback,
Mm-hmm.
or not the flashback, where Brian is the dark passenger. It's like, man, I love that. I was like, I love that. I wish that
was
would
the most
even if we
for that season. I feel like for me.
Yeah, well, I do think season 7 had a lot. Or no, that was 6, right?
That was 6.
Yeah, that was 6. Yeah, that was the Travis Marshall season. And yeah, that was one of the better episodes. That was like, we're actually doing something now in this season.
Me and you like jump for joy. We're like, oh my god,
Brian, yeah, so cool. Yeah. So season 2, like I said, Dokes is kind of on his trail. He's following him around everywhere. Deborah is going through PTSD and everything, like you said, kind of complaining about
because she is
Rudy and the ice truck
killer. She's still whiny. Yeah. It's not gotten better. Actually, I think if anything,
it's better at this worse. Point. No, I feel like in season 2 it kind of calmed. She was whiny about
she's whiny about the ice truck killer now.
Yes, now it's about him. It's not about Dexter.
We've projected. We're not like Dexter, but we're like on the ice truck killer. I'm like, I understand the girl has PTSD, as anyone would if they were almost murdered by their 2-minute fiance. But But I mean, she's going through it, which we'll give her some slack. She was, and and then even like you said, like with the Dokes, like the Dokes following Dexter, he's just like onto him. He's like, something's not right with this guy. He's too nice. He's too weird, and he's the only one in this whole
department,
Miami Metro that realizes Dexter's a little off.
And that was back in episode 1 of the first season.
He was like, "You're weird. I don't like you. You're on my radar."
Yeah, he was like, Dokes is the only person in this entire police department.
My favorite thing is just he. Dexter, going to the AA meetings. So like that's like the next thing, right? He goes to the AA meetings and like Dokes follows him there and he's like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "I'm a drug addict."
Yeah.
And he's like, "You know what, man? It's okay. I'm gonna leave you alone. Many, detectives and personnel of the police department have been in your shoes." And he's like, "Thank God this dude's leaving me alone. I could like kill in peace." And then, it turns
that lasted for like a half an episode. And then Dokes like realized after, like, wait a minute, this guy's bullshitting me because he talked to Deborah.
And then he goes to Deb and he was like, "Oh, your brother, his addiction?" And she's like, "What?"
What? Yeah.
She's like, "He doesn't even drink. What are you talking about?"
She's like, "I don't think I've ever seen him drink or do any type of drug ever."
I feel like Dokes and Dexter's dynamic, like playing games with each other, was just like my favorite because it was so like,
good. Yeah,
it was so funny because they were just so problematic with each other and they were just doing the pettiest stuff to one another.
Yeah, and then that kind of goes back to what I said, where it's like when you get the context of the later seasons, you don't realize how much you really miss that dynamic.
You do,
and how much you like. I wish they would have just kept it and not gotten rid of it.
It makes it so much sweeter when you look back into it. Like when you have everything as a whole, you're like, dude, this was just like chef's kiss.
Yep. And then, like you said, Dexter was in the AA meetings. We actually did miss that for season 1. Where at the end of the season we have the whole situation where he knocks out Paul and frames him and gets the heroin from Miami Metro and frames him and puts him in jail. And then
he's called to jail because he's becoming a problem for Rita. And he's like, "No, you're not going to be messing with my girlfriend and her kids." One thing about Dexter is that he might not like people, but he does like children, and he's not standing for like, people messing with kids at all. He's like, "No, absolutely not. Nope. This is not happening. You're going to jail."
Even in the very first episode, he kills that guy who was killing kids. Yeah, and he was like, "I don't kill kids. That's awful.
We don't mess with innocent people, especially kids." Yeah, and so we forgot to mention that.
Yeah, we did. And then too, just the admiration he had for Aster and Cody. Even just right off rip, like even though he said that was a whole kind of cover relationship for him. His relationship with Aster and Cody was always felt genuine. That he seemed like he always wanted to be there for them. Yes. So you get that whole situation where he sets up Paul, gets him thrown in jail for everything that happened, and then Rita confronts him about
Paul
it.
Paul calls Rita, and he's like,
"Oh Dexter,
who's Dexter?" Paul calls Rita from jail. look for the shoe. Dexter, it was Dexter. I know it was. I have no proof, but it was. And she's like, you're crazy, Paul. Just leave Dexter alone. He wouldn't hurt a fly. But then Rita's in the back of her mind like, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm like, dude.
And she finds
but then you go check. She finds a shoe. And then, like, what proof is that actually?
It's
what
not proof. I mean, it could have just
and
been
Rita's just immediately siding with Paul. And we're just like, what are you doing? Like, why are you
If I was Dexter, I would have been like, he was high. He just lost his shoe. Like, drunk people do stupid things, But
the most believable rebuttal to that situation would to be saying, hey, this guy's a drug addict. He's lying.
He's a drug addict. He's high. He lost his shoe.
He lost his shoe when he was running out the house.
He was such a bad liar that his best lie he could come up with was, I'm a heroin addict.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Which, like,
Dexter, you couldn't come up with anything better than that.
Better.
Like, come on.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm a drug addict, Rita, and I had to do it. I couldn't help myself. And then she's like, you need to get to AA. You got to better your life. If you want to be with me and around my kids, you better go to AA. And then, he goes to AA. We talked about the Dokes thing, but then he meets a special someone. Would you like to introduce us to the next person?
And I was going to say, he goes to AA, and then he meets Lila. Dexter, the UK woman who gets introduced, and basically, I don't condone cheating, obviously, but at the situation that we're at, when
they were on a break.
Well, I don't think they. I mean, were they really?
Yeah, they were on a break. Rita dumped him. She was like, "I'm not going to be with you." So it was like a Ross Rachel situation. It was like they were on a break. They weren't like really broken up, but they kind of were.
Yeah.
So that's then I thought we weren't together.
Yeah. So obviously, even at first, like Lila and him aren't in like a sexual, like there was like tension, right? But it didn't go anywhere or anything like that. And then eventually we get to the point where she finds out. I think him and Rita were in bed or something, and Lila called.
Yes, she left an answering machine. This is how old the show is. She leaves a
voicemail on dial.
We don't have these problems anymore in today's day and age. But she's like, are you gonna tell Rita about us? Yeah. And she's like, excuse me, tell me what, Dexter?
No. It was no, she was like,
that was when they went away.
They made up the lie about how they went away.
They went away on the trip.
Or no, he went away. He lied. He didn't tell her that Lila was there as well. And then she left the voicemail like, oh, would you imagine if Rita knew that we were in the same hotel together? And like, dude, the quickness in which Rita ran over to the phone. It's like, no, I'm going to hear this. And then
Rita was like my spirit animal at that moment. I'm like, get him right off.
And then, so then they broke up. And then, I don't remember specifics, but I think Dexter killed someone else. And then he
was searching for the men that killed his mother. That's how they ended up.
That's right. Yeah. So he went and killed the guy who was part of killing his mom. That's right, at the bar.
Yes.
That's right.
That's where they ended.
Yeah, and then I think after that, I don't think they did actually sleep together though that night. It wasn't until later on.
That night, no, it was after the fact.
No. Yeah, and then after you got
Rita like flew up on him. Then he went and met Miss Lila at her apartment, and that's when.
Yeah, and then you get the scene where, she had confronted him about Paul. He admits, that it was he did frame him. He did do he did hit him over the head. He did plant the heroin on him, get him arrested, and everything. And then she asks about Lila and is like, oh, well, did you sleep with her that night in the hotel? And he's like, no,
not that night.
And I'm just like, oh my God.
Dexter, come on, man.
And the look in Rita's eye, I was like, oh, she's going to kill him. I was like, she's not going to find out. She's just going to end up killing him. The show's going to be over. That was at least, my initial so that whole dynamic, between Lila and Rita and Dexter, I actually enjoyed that. Love interest level, I don't think Lila ranks that high for me personally, just because of where it goes, and we'll kind of get into that. But I do want to backtrack a little bit. We started talking about the FBI, the Bay Harbor Butcher case, and Lundy being introduced, and then we get into the very uncomfortable dynamic
Grandpa Lundy
between Lundy and Deb. I don't know. I really don't know how to feel about that. It kind of it's a father. Yeah, and clearly Deb has a lot of resentment for how Harry treated her, as opposed to Dexter. So, there's some weird daddy issues that
she
Deb
has
has
very
while she's
profound
with
daddy
Lundy.
issues, and she
Yeah,
wants
she
Lundy,
wants someone
who
like her
reminds
father.
her of her dad.
Yeah, which is very weird. And I mean, you get the
And
weird,
she wants
uncomfortable.
some sort of like a relationship with him. Like she ends up falling in love with Lundy, who is an old
Yeah,
man. And it's like, I'm not
yeah,
judging. They're both adults, but like it's a little weird.
it's a little weird, very weird.
And so
And
they
you
start
get
off
that
their
weird.
romantic relationship.
Yeah, and it goes pretty quick. I mean, they
It
fall in
does.
love and
It goes from 0 to
very
100. I
very
mean,
fast.
I've seen some things and I'm like, oof.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
You get
like,
that uncomfortable scene where they're making dinner and Lundy starts talking, saying weird shit and like spanking
I
her.
get like
I'm
secondhand
like, oh,
embarrassment watching that. I'm like, this doesn't even affect me, but like I feel
yeah,
awkward and weird watching it.
yeah.
And I'm like, oh God,
Anytime I get
here
a
we
clip
go.
of that, that pops up on TikTok, I'm like, oh my god, I
Yeah.
forgot how uncomfortable I felt. When it comes
But
to
like
that
she's getting
relationship.
information about the Babe Harbor Butcher case from him, and like he's letting Miami Metro work with them. So like they get these bags of the bodies, they bring them into the like container outside of Miami
Yeah,
Metro, and like they're trying to investigate like who is this crazy person? Like
yeah,
Dexter's looking at his work and he's like, oh
yeah,
crap, like look
yeah,
at the masses here. Like there's so many bodies all over, and
yeah,
they just don't even know what to do. They're just like so overwhelmed
yeah.
that they couldn't imagine this.
Yeah,
And
and then
it
Masuka
Suga.
kind of gets that lead where it was
It
I
was
can't
the
remember where
algae.
the algae, yeah, and
Mhm.
Dexter assumes that it was on the bodies, but really it was just on the rocks or
It was the
something
rocks.
in the oceans. Yeah, and you get that cool scene where he decompose gets the bodies to decompose,
That
in
was
the
before he
thing.
found out it was the bodies because he thought, oh well, I'll destroy the evidence with the bodies, and then
Yeah, he thought it. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, he
and then
thought
it
it
was
was the
like,
bodies, and then
no,
it
it was
ended up turning out it was the
flipping
rocks. So that
rocks.
was, yeah, that was a cool scene where he
And
has to
Dexter's like,
smart
gotta
his
move
way in
my
there.
boat.
Yeah. Yeah, that was really cool. So yeah, they're closing in and
Yes,
we're figuring out everything. Then, Lila starts to become pretty
possessive.
much
Mhm.
obsessed with Dexter,
Yeah,
burns down her own apartment. When he basically it says, "Hey, I don't want you anymore. I'm going back with Rita." So out of like desperation, she burns down her apartment. Which
meanwhile,
is
with the
kind of
kids
crazy.
inside, she like kidnaps Rita's children.
That was later on, I'm pretty
Oh, was
sure.
it?
Yeah, that was
Well,
later
that
on.
was all at once, but maybe I was wrong.
No, I think she didn't burn the apartment down, but she just like set it on fire.
Yeah.
And then they end up realizing it was arson after the fact. And then she's, messing with Dexter's head by like hooking up with Batista and doing the rape insinuations on
Medusa's comment. She
yeah,
had the
let me put
crazy
that
eyes.
effect. She had the
Dexter
crazy
should have
eyes.
known
Yeah,
from the
Dexter should
start.
have known from the start, 100%.
But that's the thing about guys is that they like toxic women sometimes,
They
and
do.
like she was a
And
pretty
then
girl and giving
yeah,
Dexter attention that he's not used
yeah.
to.
And I mean, Dexter, look, especially later on, I mean, he likes those toxic women.
He does.
We'll just say that. He
He
definitely
likes
likes
what he
Rita, but
likes.
yeah. Um, and then, yeah, so, we're kind of getting towards the end.
Hmm.
He has that cabin out in the middle by where he
The woods.
killed in the woods. Yeah, and it was from that guy he killed that was involved with his mom's murder.
Hmm.
And then, Dokes gets onto him and we get the infamous scene, where he finds him on the pier. He tracks his boat. After Dexter framed him, we jumping around, we kind of forgot about that. Dexter ends up framing him. Well, actually, he kind of frames himself because he steals Dexter's slides.
Yeah, he steals Dexter. He finds Dexter's
And I
blood
forgot.
slides. He steals them, and then he was
Yeah,
gonna go take them to like another country. I want to say it was Haiti to have them
yeah,
tested or
have
something by
someone
like a
test it.
military
Yeah,
friend. So he takes them, and Dexter's like, you know what, this is the perfect opportunity. I'm just gonna set
yeah,
up Dokes. He's a problem anyway. We're gonna kill two birds, one stone.
yeah.
And so
And
he does that.
I totally forgot. How did they find those slides?
They
Like
were
that's
at the
part.
airport in his trunk.
Oh, that's right. He left his car there,
He
and they
left
were
his
looking
car there,
for him.
and they were in the
Yeah,
trunk of his car.
that's right. Yeah,
And so they made it seem like, oh, he was fleeing and he left the slides. And,
yeah,
when they brought him back, that was what was going on with like the car at the airport. Because
yeah.
going back, like Lila was obsessed with Dexter at this point, and so she put a tracker on his car. She wanted to know where he was doing, who he was with at all times. So
That's
she
right.
put a
Yeah,
GPS in his car, and he was going into the cabin in the woods because he was holding the one guy hostage that had killed his mother and everything there. That's where he had lived, or no, he had murdered him. No, he killed him there
yeah. He killed him there.
at the cabin.
I don't know what it was. I don't remember
He
what
hadn't
that
disposed of the
cabin
body or
was.
something yet. There was something
Yeah,
going on, I forget. And so
yeah,
Lila goes there, and she finds Dokes locked in the cage. He had gotten Dokes held captive at that point.
Yeah.
Lila's like, what the fuck is going on around here? Like, why is this guy locked in the cage? Like, why is Dexter coming here? And so basically Dokes like spills the tea. He's like, hey, Dexter Morgan is crazy.
He's the Bay Harbor
Butcher. He did this and that. And she's just like, you know what? I got my problems. He's got his problems. It's okay, but you're a bigger problem, so you got to go.
Yeah. She's like, oh, poor baby. He's so alone. And
he's so alone.
I'm like, this crazy bitch. Oh, man. Yeah, I was like, it's kind of funny, too, because the character of Lila kind of, like, put the groundwork for what we get later on with another character. But she was, like Dee said, she had the crazy eyes. The
crazy eyes.
That lady, she was cuckoo for
Miami Metro, ready to throw down with any man that looked at her a certain way. Okay, she was crazy.
When he wanted nothing to do with her, he just showed up to work and she's hanging out with Batista and Masuka and everybody at the police department. I'm like, damn, this lady is nuts. So like you said, Lila ends up showing up after, and too, we didn't really talk about it, but like that dynamic and why I felt like Dokes was killed off and that storyline ended way too early was those last couple episodes when Dokes was in the cage and he finally was talking to Dexter as who he was, talking with the Dark Passenger.
Yeah.
Their dynamic, like he kind of, I felt like he respected him a little bit more when he finally, like he thought what he was doing was terrifying, but he actually respected him a little bit more to finally.
He just wasn't being fake at that point.
Yeah, he finally was like, this is the person I knew you were. I knew this guy was here all this time. And when that finally came out, that just dynamic between him and Dexter was great. And then like you get that scene where all those cartel members come back and they're going to kill Dokes and Dexter basically has to save him. And I'm like, that right there, where I felt like it would have been better to leave that season off in a place where maybe Dexter couldn't prove it was him without just his word, but like somehow they both get saved. Maybe they put it on Lila or something. Yeah. And they both get off, and then going forward, them having like an understanding of one another.
Dokes was never going to have an understanding. Dokes
no, I mean, well, I think there would have. Well, I'm saying if he couldn't get him, like, what was he going to do? Kill him? Dokes, that's not.
I think he would resort to that. Maybe like use the code of the code.
I mean, Dokes did kill that.
He was special ops. I mean, like
in cold blood. Yeah.
He was Dexter's a threat to society. He's taking him out. Like he's not an understanding guy.
Yeah. So then like we were saying, Lila ends up killing Dokes.
She sets the cabin on fire. It explodes.
Yeah, which clears Dexter.
There, I was convinced that he got out, and I was like, "Oh, that's not Dokes. He's not dead."
Yeah,
and I was like,
"No, I never was." Yeah, when you said that, I was like, "I mean, he's a fucking shish kebab at this point. There ain't no way."
I was like, "No, that's somebody else." No, it was Dokes. So, I mean, Lila ended up setting the place on fire with the gas leak, and then it blew up, and then it just it was fine. Dexter's like, "Oh, thank God!" Sigh of relief. Like the Bay Harbor Butcher is now dead. I don't have to worry about him anymore.
So he pretty much took the fall for him. Lila leaves town, goes to England, I think, or was it France?
Paris.
Paris, yeah. France. She goes to Paris, and then Dexter has that awesome moment at the very end where he sends her the card of Dokes, and then comes in and just fucking kills her. And that was the first time we saw Dexter kill someone not in his traditional way, where he has a kill room, where he does the table and everything. He got in, got out, and said, "Peace out. I'm going back home."
He went to Paris for like 20 minutes, killed her, and then went right home.
Yeah, and for me, that season 2, for a long time through the watch, I think I told you it was my favorite season. Until a season that came up, and even then, after I watched what is now my favorite season, initially I still thought season 2 was my favorite. Yeah, but I think in time, season 2 is my second favorite still, so it's still a great season of Dexter.
Yeah.
And like I said, outside of those little things that I thought were weird, like Deb and Lundy, and some of the character decisions, like killing off Dokes too early.
But yes, and then Lundy, he ends up, the case gets solved. He's like, "Yeah, I kind of got to go, honey. I got to go solve some other FBI cases." And she's kind of heartbroken over this. And she's like, "Oh, I loved you. And, I thought we were going to be like together for long term." And it just didn't end up working that way. So then, now Deb is single. Lundy's gone on to doing other FBI stuff. And Dexter's just like, "Okay, I got away with it. Now on to season 3.
Yeah. Yeah, and then that basically leads right into season 3,
Mm-hmm.
and the catalyst that starts that off, and with what I said about how I think the code kind of gets a
Mm-hmm.
little morally flexible the later on that we go into the show.
Yeah.
He is stalking the drug dealer Freebo, and wants to make him a victim. And when he
Mm-hmm.
goes to take Freebo, he gets there, and Oscar Prada, Miguel Prada's brother, is there, and he ends up killing him. And it's the first time really that Dexter kills somebody that doesn't isn't really a part of the code, at least that we know. They never end up
Yeah.
revealing anything about Oscar that would indicate that he was
Mm-hmm.
someone who was involved, someone who fits the code and who Dexter would normally kill.
Yeah.
So he kills him, and then eventually, that leads into Miguel Brada coming in, played by Jimmy Smits, who we knew as Nero
Nero
in
from
Sons of
Sons of
Anarchy
Anarchy.
years ago. We loved that show, and
Yes.
that was a big role he played in there. And he's a high profile district attorney. Everybody knows who he is, so all eyes are on his brother being killed. They
Yeah.
want answers. They want to figure it out, and then eventually it's revealed. I don't remember what he was doing, but eventually Miguel finds him, and or no, he ends up getting Freebo finally because everyone thinks it's Freebo essentially. The cops think it's Freebo. He ends up getting Freebo. He ends up killing Freebo. And as
Mm-hmm.
he's walking out, getting ready to go back and clean up his scene after killing Freebo, is when he runs into Miguel. And Miguel has the blood on his shirt, that we find out
Mm-hmm.
isn't actually the blood.
Yeah.
And then they become friends. And this is kind of the first time that anyone in the series knows who Dexter is, truly. And we feel like he actually has a friend, which I
Mm-hmm.
thought was a very interesting dynamic to go
Mm-hmm.
into this new season.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Um, I gotta say, I'm not a big fan of Miguel Prado.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, like he's okay, but I just felt like
Yeah.
that whole storyline was just kind of draggy for me. Like, especially coming off of the Bay Harbor Butcher season,
Yeah.
then we go into
Yes.
this, and
Yeah.
he was just like almost as if like he became obsessed with Dexter too in a way, almost like
He
how
did.
Deb
Yeah.
was in a way, and it was just
Yeah.
like
Hmm.
it was overbearing for me. Like every time you turned around, there was freaking Miguel Prado. Like you couldn't get
Yeah.
rid of him. Like no matter what, I'm like, dude, I need a
Yeah.
break from Miguel. Like Miguel needs to go somewhere and leave Dexter alone for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And I grant you that's like the point of the season. You know, he's this district attorney. He wants to get justice for his brother, but on the low, he knows that justice has been served to Freebo, who
Yeah.
killed his brother, even though it was really Dexter.
But he doesn't
And
know that for the whole season.
he doesn't know that for the whole season.
Yeah,
But like
that's not
he just
revealed until he's on the table, essentially.
yes.
So,
And so he's just happy. He's like, look, Dexter's such a great guy. He murdered my brother's murderer.
yeah.
And we're besties now. And like I know his secrets. So we could just talk together and be best friends, and our wives can meet and they could be best friends, and it'll all work out and it'd be great. But
Yeah.
the problem is that you can't have somebody like Miguel Prado who's so like high standing in society and think that they're your friend. They're always out
Yeah.
for themselves. He was never
Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
be for Dexter.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, that's kind of crazy. I didn't know that you weren't that big of a fan
I'm
of
not.
Miguel.
No.
I will say, out of the first 4 seasons, I definitely think season 3 is the weakest.
Yeah.
And again, I
Mhm.
think this is another season, for me at least personally, that has a little
Mhm.
bit of revisionist history when you get the back half. I'm like,
Yeah.
even though I felt like at the time when I was watching this season and this storyline with Miguel and the Skinner killer,
Mhm.
was weak. It did feel like, especially like you said, being sandwiched between the Bay Harbor Butcher season 2 and then
Mhm.
Trinity in season 4. It was like, yeah, that did feel a little weak.
Yeah.
But then when you
It
compare
wasn't
it,
bad. It was enjoyable.
no, it was still very enjoyable, and I still think I lump it together in the first
Yeah.
4
He's
seasons.
not
It's
my
the weakest
favorite
one.
like
Yeah,
villain,
yeah,
you know?
yeah. But I actually think he's also kind of lumped into that group of characters from early on in the show that I feel like should have lasted a little bit longer. Me personally.
See, me,
Um,
I was like, thank God he didn't.
yeah.
I
I
was like,
didn't
I
know
can't
that. I was gonna say we
handle
never
anymore with
really.
Prado.
I think we just wanted to move into season 4 so fast. We didn't really discuss season 3 all that much, so that's kind of
Yeah.
interesting because I didn't know that that's how you felt
I
about
was
him.
like, thank God his time is up.
Yeah. So that's kind of funny. I'm like, wow, that's I thought I was
No,
gonna know what we were gonna say here all day, but
no.
you surprised me a little bit with that one. And then obviously too, moving away from Miguel, we'll kind
Yep.
of pick that back up at the
Yeah.
end. This is the season obviously that we find out that Rita is pregnant
Hmm.
after he got back with her. And then
Yeah.
he proposes and they get engaged, and which that was a funny scene where like I think it was like Aster or Cody suggested it, and he's like, "Oh, well, you want to get married?" And she's just like,
No,
"No, not like this.
you
What do you
don't
mean?"
mean it.
Yeah. So I thought that
Like
was
when
really
you
cool.
actually mean it, then
Yeah,
come back to
yeah,
me. But
yeah,
no.
yeah. So that was kind of going on, and then you obviously had, and two. I think this is another reason why I kind of did enjoy Miguel and his relationship with Dexter and plotline for the story. In the background, you have the Skinner killer murders going
Hmm.
on, which
Yeah.
I mean, for me, like out of any of the antagonists throughout the entire show, like I don't even remember who that guy was
His
or
name was
what he was
something
doing.
King.
He was the guy
He
who
was a
was
tree
clipping
trimmer.
the trees. Yeah, and
For the longest time, I was convinced it was Miguel Prado. I was like, he
yeah,
is the Skinner. You're
yeah,
not
you
telling
did.
me otherwise.
Yeah,
This guy's out here
yeah,
skinning people.
yeah, and yeah, for me, I was just like, I even thinking back now, like I said, I know a lot of the earlier seasons are kind of a blur for us because we binged through them so quickly, but
Yeah.
I'm like, man, that guy, I'm like, I don't remember a damn thing
No, I
about it.
remember his last name being like King. That's all I can
Yeah,
tell you about that guy because he
yeah,
was so
George King,
irrelevant to the
George
story.
King.
George King. He
Yeah,
was so irrelevant to the story. Really, I mean, like they
yeah,
needed somebody to be like the murderer,
yeah,
but
yeah. Yeah, because you always had that was the thing too, and we haven't really talked about in the early seasons, especially, is they kind of always had like a freak of the week thing with the
yeah.
episodes of Dexter, where it was like you always had the main storyline of what was going on, but then you also had
Hmm.
like these other little side murderers that would always be going on in the
Yeah.
background, and that was kind of
Mhm.
what the Skinner was. It was really just like kind of filler. Truthfully, that's the way I
Yeah.
would describe it. It was filler in the
Hmm.
background while you're dealing with this whole Miguel Prado situation and them and their
Yeah.
relationship budding. Um, and then so yeah, the season progresses and Miguel kind of starts to become a bit of a threat. He kills with Dexter. He kind of gets the high
Mhm.
from killing, and
Yeah.
then he tries to convince Dexter to kill Ellen Wolf, the lawyer that he is,
She's a defense attorney.
or defense attorney, yeah, that he
He's a
has beef
criminal
with.
defense attorney, so like she's for the bad guys,
Yeah.
and he's like,
And
Dexter,
he,
let's kill her.
yeah, and Dexter's like, no, I mean
She
that
doesn't
she
fit the
doesn't.
code. She's doing her job.
Yeah, and then you get that scene that I always joke around with, where he's like, "What the fuck you?" and like stands up and like yells at him so like abruptly, and I'm like, what? That's just the way that was
This
filmed.
man
I
is
thought
not
was funny.
stable.
Yeah, no, not at all. I mean, crazy. Um, so yeah, he starts to become a threat, and him and Miguel start going at it. You get that awesome. I think regardless what you think about the whole season 3 storyline and Miguel,
Hmm.
the rooftop scene, their back and forth that they had on the
Yeah.
rooftop was amazing. I watched that clip on
Hmm.
TikTok, like every other week. When I see
Yeah.
it pop up, I'm like, oh, that was such a great scene. Where they go back and forth. Dexter with
Yeah.
his like witty, commanding humor that he has.
Hmm.
With Miguel, who's just like unhinged completely at that point with Dexter.
Yeah.
Um, and then the Skinner eventually kidnaps Dexter before his wedding, before him and Rita get married, and he that's where Dexter goes through kind of revelations with Harry, that he about becoming a father and becoming a husband to Rita. And
Hmm.
this is why I do like season 3, is because this is really the turn for Dexter realizing like, hey, I do care about people. There are people in my life that, yes, this started out as a cover, but I
Hmm.
really care for these people and I really want to have this life. That the cover became the life essentially for him
Yeah.
in this moment.
Hmm.
um and yeah, that the finale was just so weird because I feel like you're having all these emotional moments, and then he's like, all right, let me fight the Skinner who we don't give a fucking shit about.
Yeah.
It's like that should have been Miguel, and
Yeah.
he does kill Miguel, and he admits,
He does.
he admits that he killed Oscar and everything.
Yeah.
um so yeah, and then Dexter and Rita get married, and
And then it ends
very
with
sweet
him
moment. And
bleeding on her wedding dress.
what was that?
It ends with him like bleeding on her wedding dress. Like,
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Kind of like symbolizing that, like, hey,
yeah.
even though you're trying to move on, life's
Mm-hmm.
always going to come back for you.
Yep.
I don't think we're missing anything else for season 3 at this point.
Not really. Like that's
Yeah, we
substantial.
pretty much covered it. So we'll move in.
Season
Season
4.
4. I talked about season 2 being my favorite for the longest. But it's season 4 for me now. And
Yeah.
it took me a little bit to get there. And I think
Yeah.
it was because of the topic. You know, we'll kind of let's start at the end and go backwards.
Okay.
Devastation. You know, when Rita died, and
Massacre.
the way that it was played out, I think
Mm-hmm.
was just so masterfully done.
Yeah.
You have Dexter. This whole season. You have this back and forth. He we won't. Okay, I lied. We won't start at the end. We'll start at the beginning. It's hard to just go straight into the end without
You gotta have a
actually
little context.
yeah. So we start off the season, and he's now married to Rita. Harrison's born. They have a house. They're living the family life, and pretty much Dexter is losing his mind because the man hasn't slept. The man can't kill. Everything in his life is going crazy.
Yes.
I think he ends up, if I remember correctly, he's like at a kill and he ends up like falling asleep at the wheel or something.
Yes, and gets a car
And
accident.
they trick us, and I think they make us, or no, the body was in the trunk.
Yeah, it was.
And he gets into a car accident, and everything, and that ends up leading to him having to retrieve the body and everything. But it's starting a pattern of sloppiness because he's basically thinking to himself like, hey, I have to kind of choose at this point. Do I want this life, or do I want to continue to kill and do what I've been doing? And then we obviously get the introduction to the Trinity Killer. Arthur Mitchell, played by John Lithgow, who, for me and you, at least, from what we've watched, he was sweet old Barney's dad in How I Met Your Mother. Which is like completely the polar opposite of who the Trinity Killer was. And, so this brings back Lundy into the fold when that happens. And, he basically tells Dexter about how there is a killer that he calls the Trinity Killer, who kills in threes all across the country, has never been caught. And that right there alone piques Dexter's interest because he wants to look to other serial killers in order to learn and be able to kind of live a balanced life.
For 30
he's killing.
Years.
He's getting away with it. He
for a very
might
long
have
time.
a family.
Yeah.
So he kind of, I'm sorry. Once Lundy comes back into the fold, he lets Dexter know he is, and he wants to figure out who this guy is. So he ends up. I don't even remember how he figures out his identity. I don't know if you remember that or not. I don't.
Who finds out whose identity?
How Dexter figures out who the Trinity Killer is. Do you remember? I don't know why.
How he finds
I'm drawing
out.
a blank.
Yeah, I'm really blank too. How he finds out.
I can't remember. Oh no, I remember. So Lundy is investigating him.
Yeah.
And then remember he runs into Trinity outside the building, and he it has the tape recorder, and he gives a description of him.
Yes.
And then shortly after, when Lundy and Deb end up rekindling, obviously, after he's back into the picture. And then when that happens, Lundy comes in and he ends up getting murdered in the parking lot. And essentially, once Dex sneaks into Lundy's apartment, steals the recorder, gets a description of him, and he ends up finding out it's Arthur. Which, I hated the Lundy and Deb storyline. That shit was for the birds for me. But it was kind of sad to see Lundy die because I said, I liked Lundy's character for the FBI side of it. He was obviously very intelligent.
It wasn't a bad character. It's just you didn't like the relationship.
I didn't like that relationship with him and Deb, but his character overall, I felt was done very well on the FBI side. I felt like he was very smart. And I also always kind of got the feeling that he kind of knew who Dex was. I know, he never, it doesn't really make any sense. It feels like he would have tried to catch him, but I don't know. I always got that feeling at least.
It made me sad too with Lundy because it's with Lundy in his death, him and Deb rekindled, and they were in the parking lot, and she was there with him. She ends up getting shot as well.
Yeah. Yes.
And so she watches him die right in front of her, and
Yeah.
she's like helpless watching the person that you love die in front of you. And it's like,
Yes. Yeah.
even though you feel you didn't really like them as a couple, it's like
The
anyone
death
who has
was.
been in a
Yeah.
relationship or like you're in love with somebody, like you put yourself in that position, like, God, what would I do if like you were murdered right in front of me and then I'm
Yeah.
just like helpless and I watch like you fade
Yeah.
away, it's like,
Yeah.
so with that, you did feel really bad for Deb,
Yeah.
and you could relate like morally like with her and like
Yeah.
her trying to cope with that. And you're like, oh my God, Trinity's onto him. Like, Trinity's trying to murder him out in parking lots. Now Dexter's pissed because he's like, now Trinity's, he shot my sister. Like, he's trying to come after my family now. This is personal. So he takes it to a whole another level.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. I agree. Yeah. I mean, yeah. The way it played out, I felt like was executed very well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then from there, that's when Dexter, figures out who Arthur is, realizes he's just a normal family man. At least at first, that's what we think, that he's just a normal family man and nothing's wrong there. So again, kind of like with Brian, Dexter views Arthur as like someone he wants to be like, right? That's the type of inspiration that Dexter has, where he wants to be that guy. He wants to be able to satisfy the dark passenger and still have a family.
Like he goes to church, he has his little thing where he builds houses, and he's like, wow,
like contributing to society. Although
he's like,
we find out how dark that really is, where we find out that he's actually bearing children there, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So he goes under the alias Kyle Butler, all that, makes him think that he's somebody else, and then slowly starts to realize that, hey, this guy is not he doesn't have it as under control as he let on, right? So this makes Dex kind of question, like, okay, well, maybe this isn't the guy I thought. Let's not let's not mold my life after him, right?
Yeah.
And then too, because he starts to meet the family and stuff, and they introduce you to his son. What was his son? I can't remember his son's name.
I can't remember his son's name either.
Yeah.
The son and the daughter, I couldn't remember their names. But Trinity's son.
Yeah, and you get that hilarious Thanksgiving scene.
Yeah.
You get the hilarious Thanksgiving scene where like it's very tense there, and they're saying thanks. Arthur's like, "Oh, wow,
you, Arthur."
Shut up, cunt. Like I walked around saying that for like how long around that time?
Forever. Oh my God, that was like a funny catch line. It was just like so out of like pocket,
out of nowhere.
You weren't expecting it.
Yeah. Well, and again, like I said,
that his family dynamic is like very weird. Like on the outside, it's like, oh, they have this great family, but you find out like, oh, he's locking his daughter in her room. She has to ask for permission. Like his son is like so scared of his dad, and like he's trying to live this perfect lifestyle. And the wife's just there like, my loving husband.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, clearly she,
okay.
It was obviously revealed too later on in the show that she allowed Arthur to abuse the kids, abuse her, didn't even care. Which that kind of goes in more into the psychology of abusers and what their victims turn into and stuff. So yeah, I mean, at this point though, in this part of the show, the writing is absolutely immaculate. I mean, this season didn't have any filler. It really didn't have much of anything that I had issues with. And then one thing we forgot to mention in season 3 was the introduction of Joey Quinn. Which we didn't bring that up until I just was reading about season 4.
Yeah, Joey Quinn was the new detective, and he was kind of like Deb's partner. He annoyed the hell out of her. She wanted nothing to do with him because she had like a filler boyfriend. I can't remember his name. He was just like there for that
Jesus. I can't remember his name. You're right.
She had this little boyfriend, and Joey was there. He was flirting with her all the time. He was her new like partner since like Dokes had died, and she just wasn't interested. She turned him down. She's like, "You're really annoying. This is professional. I don't want you."
Yeah.
And so going into this season, he's still her partner, and they're on better terms this season.
Yeah. And he kind of felt like the stand-in for Dokes for me. Like I feel like when I look at what his like storylines were early on when he first came in, they felt like that's where Dokes should have been, right? Like that's what Dokes should have been doing at this time. So he was kind of the stand-in. So at first I wasn't a huge fan of him. But then you get into season 4, and he ends up, having the relationship with Christine. who's the journalist who is covering the Trinity case and everything like that.
Yes.
And they end up having a relationship. And, it's slowly revealed that there's something kind of weird and going on with her. And then it's slowly revealed that she is the daughter of Trinity, and was pretty much he abandoned her, right? He, not outside of his current wife, he had her in another marriage. So she's it's revealed that she had killed Lundy for him, essentially to stop Lundy from figuring out who Trinity was, because he was getting on his path and everything like that. And you could just see that, like, she just gets rejected by him over and over again. He doesn't actually want anything to do with her.
She's another daddy issues.
Pretty much. And he just used her as a pawn, essentially, in order to kill Lundy and get Lundy off of his trail. So, that ends up getting revealed, right? And she ends up confessing to Deb, because, she's ridden with guilt that she did that for her dad, and then her dad wants nothing to do with her. So she's going to turn herself in, and then we have the scene, obviously, where she just commits suicide right in front of Deb. Adding on other more tragic shit that Deb's been seeing recently.
Almost murdered by her fiance, and then you got
then everything starts to escalate with Arthur, and there's this whole cat and mouse game where, like, Dexter is bribing him for money, or he's gonna, like, out him as a pedophile, which I thought was kind of funny. It was just like a little way to trick Arthur and have him running around. But then he figures out who Dexter is, and then we get that iconic scene where he just fucking walks through the front door of Miami Metro like a badass. Even though that's not realistic, would literally never happen. But it was such a great scene.
For sakes.
Yeah. And then he walks into Miami Metro. One thing about that scene, and I think I've told you this, that bugs me, is when, Arthur walks in, Dexter just walks straight up to him with his badge on, with his name.
Yeah. Didn't even try to hide his identity.
Didn't even try to hide. Like, dude, I'd be trying to run out the back door at that point.
I'd be hiding in my office under my desk or something. Like,
or something.
Didn't even know there.
Yeah.
Like,
now, I mean, Arthur might have been able to get information from somebody else, right, and figure out who he was. But still, so we get the iconic, hello, Dexter Morgan. And then at that point, he tells him to leave him alone. Oh yeah, go ahead.
To go back, it's like when he was still under the alias of Kyle Butler, Dexter was. And he had the opportunity to kill Trinity. Like, he had this opportunity.
Yes, you're right. Yes, I'm glad you brought that up.
But, he didn't do it because he wanted to do it in his own way. He was getting very greedy and very, like, self-absorbed. Like, he wanted to do it his way on his table. Like, he had the opportunity to just be said and done. End Trinity right there. It would have looked like an accident. Perfect playoff. But no, he saves him instead of letting him die. And then he attempted
multiple
to kill him
times too.
Multiple times. And then he tried to kill him on Thanksgiving in the kitchen in front of the family. And he didn't do it. That was the second time he let Trinity go. Which will play into, like, later what we're talking about here.
Yeah. So and pretty much early on when he had opportunities to kill Arthur and he kept letting him go, that was more I think to learn from him. He still wanted to learn. But then once he realized that all was a facade, I don't know why, he just didn't get the right opportunity and he kept slipping through his fingers. And then eventually we get into the finale. And he gets him. I don't remember what exactly he did. He, like, jumped out of his car. He was hiding in his trunk or something and jumps out of his car. And he ends up getting him. And he ends up killing Arthur on the table. And, before he kills Arthur basically tells him, like, Dexter's going on about how, oh, well, I'm never going to be like you. I'm better. I'm going to do all this different. And he says, well, it's already over, And at the time, we didn't know what he meant by that, right?
Yeah.
And, so he kills Arthur, takes his body out to the sea. They have that awesome scene where they play, the Astor's birthday party track, and he says the monologue about Rita staring at the moon. And it's like, you think you're going to get this ending, of the season like you got the last 3 seasons, where it's going to be happy. Everything's going to get wrapped up in this nice, neat bow. You go back to the house. No one's there. At least you think.
Well, he gets the voicemail from Rita, like, "Oh, I hope you're looking at the moon and everything." And he's looking at the moon while he's on the boat. And so he goes home, and she was actually going on a trip she'd left earlier in the episode.
Yeah.
She was going down to the Keys. He was going to meet her.
Going out of town. Yep. Yeah.
And so he comes home and he notices her keys around the island in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And everything. And she did say in the voicemail, like, oh, I forgot something. I have to go back and grab it because, I can't leave for this trip without it, So he sees her keys there, and that's very sus, He's just looking around the house and doesn't really see anything.
Yeah. Then he calls her, and here's the phone. Hear Harrison start crying. And then he goes into the bathroom, and Rita's dead. Harrison living the same, born in blood, just like his dad, sitting there. Like you said, uncontrollable tears that you had when we saw that.
I try to keep it in.
Yeah, and I mean, on a
pool of blood, and it's like, like you have this baby. It's upset. It's in the dark. It's
you wonder how long he's been.
How long has he been sitting there? Has it been hours?
Yeah.
And this poor baby's looking at his mom. His mom's just dead. She's bled out in the bathtub. There's water and blood all over the place. And everything, and it you get into like the context of that later on, like you said, with Harrison's like flashbacks, but it makes you wonder, like, with they leave that open to the viewer, like, did Trinity like tell her who Dexter Morgan was before he killed her? We'll never know. Like, that's not they left that up to like the viewer's discretion. Like, you could think maybe she did. He told her, and then maybe like I could be like, oh, maybe he didn't, so I do like when they leave something open like that, because it's open to your imagination what you truly believe. Did she ever find out? Did she not find out?
Yeah. And like I said too, I don't even think that I had that thought until New Blood later, right? Until you get to New Blood and he has that flashback, and then you're like, oh shit, like it was such a devastating thing that like I tried to not even think about it. Because I'm like, I don't even want to worry. I'm done thinking about it.
And then especially with like the flashbacks from Harrison and like
New
Blood, I'm like, oh, PTSD.
You see Trinity like naked and like
naked. I didn't even think about Trinity being naked. That is a jump scare and a half.
Yeah,
like,
I was like,
no, thank you. I don't want
like
John Lithgow Trinity being butt naked. Trying to jump in the bathtub with me. I'm good.
I'm like,
and then it makes you wonder. Like, she clearly was just coming back to grab something, so that means that like he grabbed her, made her strip naked, get in the tub.
Yeah. Well, I think didn't he drug the women that he did that to or something?
No, they were already in the bathtub when he would do it.
Or he would wouldn't he choke them out or something like that? He'd make them pass out at first to get.
But it's like the fact that like his little greasy little Trinity hands got a hold of Rita and was doing all that. Like, no, thank you.
Yeah. And I'm like, damn, I really hope they never show us that.
I hope not either. Oh my god.
I hope that never happens. I'll be so scared.
That's a horror movie right there.
Yeah. So to wrap that up, I didn't even realize we are an hour and 20 minutes into this, and we've only gone through half of these seasons. So I'll probably say that we're probably going to wrap it up after this season, and maybe we can pick up on another day.
We can do a part 2.
Yeah, we'll do a part 2 and pick up on season 5.
Because there's just like so much detail.
Yeah, I'm like, dude, holy shit. Yeah, we're an hour and 20 in. I didn't even realize that.
I'm like, I want to get through everything. Like, and this is like a really good place to leave off and we could pick up because.
For sure. Yeah. So my last thought on that, for me, like one of the best seasons of television ever. And just one of the most shocking endings. Like, could you imagine? We were lucky that we just picked up this series now.
Yeah, when it was already done.
So 20 years after it started. Yeah. And because the people who were watching live, who left off on that, like, I don't know what, I would have been, like, emotionally wrecked. I would have never been able to deal with it
anymore. Like, I don't
it's
watch
hard.
things
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd rather wait till the show was like completely out. Like, so I don't have to, the only thing is like nowadays is the spoilers. It's bad.
Spoilers. Yeah. Well, you got to think back in the day, they didn't have that, No, they did like internet still existed.
Super bad spoilers.
Yeah. But it wasn't like how it is now where like you could just log on to Twitter and get a freaking spoiler right in your feed,
I know.
I will say, I think some shows benefit from week to week. Like I'm very curious. We're a couple episodes into Original Sin.
Yeah.
And Resurrection starts this summer. So I'm very curious because, like, obviously we're going to watch that. And I'm going to watch it week to week because I don't want to be spoiled on anything. So I'm very curious to see how that's going to play out. Especially since we're going to binge through everything, right?
Yeah.
Because Original Sin's already over. So we're going to be able to binge through that.
Yeah.
So I'm very curious, how that's going to play and whether or not I'm going to either like or dislike it and want to stream it. But
no.
So yeah. Any more thoughts on the ending from you?
From season 4, like definitely by far my favorite season. Like
yeah,
the show, like the series as a whole of Dexter. Like my peak is season 4, and it's not that it gets bad. It doesn't get like terribly bad like this next season. Like it's still good.
Yeah.
You know, but this was like the peak for me, and it could be different for everybody. And I guess we'll go into that more when we do our second stream, because we are gonna have to like cut it here pretty soon. Because it's just like we want to talk about things in detail enough.
You
don't want to like kind of just know. So we're kind of.
I will say that this stream, was a lot more positive. Right, those were seasons that were positive. I'm definitely not going to feel.
It's going to change up a little bit as we go on.
Look, we went an hour and 20. I will bet any money that half of that, if we do the same amount for part 2, half of that time is going to be on season 8, because that's like the only season of this entire show that I dislike. So so okay, cool. You know, this was fun. I love talking Dexter. Like I said, we're cutting it halfway. We'll pick up and we're gonna pick back up season 5. Probably we'll figure out a day and we'll post.
We're gonna try to do it probably soon, I would assume.
Yeah. Probably. I mean, maybe next week. That would probably be my ideal.
We'll have to talk about it, and we'll post on our social media. And Alan will post on his. He'll post on TikTok,
TikTok, YouTube,
X, everywhere. Go follow him, so that way you can get notifications. I'm just the wife that joins the party. He has all the socials, so
yes. So yeah, I'm Alan's Movie Talk, Twitter, everything, X, TikTok, YouTube. I'm Alan's Movie Talk on everything. So you know, subscribe, and this was a great stream. I'm glad we did this. Some good conversations, and then come back for the second half of the show, and you know, we'll have a little bit more negativity, which will be fun.
Yeah.
So. All right, everyone. So have a great night.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.